Ireland had just won its freedom from the British Empire. But what came next shocked the world. Instead of peace, Ireland went to war with itself. Brothers who had fought side by side against the British now faced each other as enemies. Old friends became executioners. Villages turned into battlegrounds. And the dream of freedom came with a terrible cost. This is the untold story of the Irish Civil War. A story of heartbreak, betrayal, and a country torn in two, just when it was supposed to be free. A nation united in victory, only to be shattered from within. So get ready as we uncover the forgotten war that nearly broke Ireland apart forever. Now let's delve in. For centuries, Ireland fought for freedom. British rule brought famine, poverty, and countless uprisings. But the Irish never gave up. In 1919, they declared independence. What followed was the Irish War of Independence, a bloody guerrilla war. Irish fighters ambushed British troops. The British responded by burning homes, shooting suspects, and punishing entire communities. Ordinary people suffered the most. Their villages became battlegrounds. Fear was everywhere. Then, in 1921, a treaty was signed. The Anglo-Irish Treaty. It gave Ireland a free state. They would have their own government, their own army. But there was a catch. Ireland would still swear loyalty to the British Crown, and 6 counties in the north, Northern Ireland, would remain under British control. Some leaders like MichaelCollins believed it was a smart move. They saw it as a first step to full freedom. But others were furious. To them, it wasn't freedom. It was compromise, a half measure, a betrayal. They hadn't fought and died just to kneel before a crown again. Ireland was free on paper, but the soul of the nation was torn. Instead of healing, the wounds grew deeper. And just when peace seemed possible, the real conflict began. At first, the streets were filled with joy. Irish flags waved, people hugged in the streets. After centuries of struggle, they finally had a country of their own. But it didn't last. The treaty that ended war with Britain started a new war inside Ireland. It split the people in two. On one side, the pro-treaty group. Led by MichaelCollins, they accepted the treaty. They believed it was a step toward true independence. They were ready to build a nation, slowly but surely. On the other side, the anti-treaty group, led by Eamon de Valera and hardline Republicans. They saw the treaty as giving in to Britain. To them, it betrayed everything the Irish had died for. Suddenly, the same fighters who once stood shoulder to shoulder were on opposite sides. Brothers argued, friends fell out. Entire families were split in two, by belief, by loyalty, by pain. Both sides began to prepare for something unthinkable. Not a war against the British, but a war against their own. Old weapons were cleaned, new battle lines were drawn, and Irishmen, once heroes of independence, began turning their guns on each other. Peace had come too soon. Before old wounds could heal, a new war was about to begin. In June 1922, the war against Britain was over, but now, a new war had begun, between Irishmen. The first spark came when anti-treaty forces seized the Four Courts building in Dublin, one of the country's most important symbols of law and national authority. The new Free State government, led by pro-treaty leaders, couldn't ignore it. If they allowed rebellion, chaos would spread. So they did the unthinkable. They ordered an attack, not on British soldiers, but on fellow Irishmen. Cannons fired, streets echoed with machine gun fire. For 3 days, Dublin burned. Irish soldiers, once brothers in arms, now faced each other in deadly combat. One side fought for the new Free State, the other fought for what they believed was true freedom. But it didn't stop in Dublin. The war spread like wildfire. Town after town fell to government forces. The Free State had better weapons and support from Britain. The anti-treaty side, now called the Irregulars, turned to guerrilla warfare. They ambushed convoys, destroyed rail lines, attacked at night, then vanished into the countryside. There were no front lines, no clear battlefields. It was a dirty, chaotic war, and for ordinary people, terrifying. The fight for Irish freedom had now become a fight for Ireland's soul, and no one, not even the winners, would come out clean. But beyond the battlefield, the deepest wounds were personal. The Irish Civil War wasn't just political, it was heartbreak made real. It tore through families, towns, and friendships. There were brothers who once shared a childhood, now firing at each other from opposite hills. Best friends who once fought side by side against the British, now dug trenches to protect themselves from each other. The stories from this time are chilling. In County Kerry, violence reached its darkest moments. Anti-treaty fighters planted landmines to stop government troops. The Free State responded with fury. Captured fighters weren't just jailed, many were executed without trial. One of the most haunting events occurred in March 1923. 9 anti-treaty prisoners were tied together. A landmine was placed beneath them. Then, it was detonated remotely. The explosion didn't just kill them, it shocked the soul of the nation. But both sides committed cruel acts. Churches were burned, homes destroyed, civilians punished, entire communities traumatized. This wasn't war with rules or honor. It was fear, vengeance, and raw pain. People didn't ask anymore who was right, they just asked, how did we get here? Ireland, so proud of its struggle for freedom, now found itself drowning in blood it spilled on its own soil. It wasn't a battle against outsiders. It was brother against brother, and no one would ever be the same again. If there was one man who symbolized the heart and hope of a new Ireland, it was MichaelCollins. He was young, smart, and fearless, a master of guerrilla warfare, the man who negotiated the treaty with Britain. To many, he was the future of Ireland. But on August 22, 1922, that future was stolen. Collins was traveling through County Cork, his home. But Cork was also an anti-treaty stronghold. He knew the risks. Some urged him not to go, but he believed no Irishman would raise a gun against him. He was wrong. At a place called Beal na Blath, his convoy was ambushed. A single bullet struck him in the head. MichaelCollins was dead at just 31. The news shattered the country. Even his enemies were stunned. He wasn't just a general, he was a symbol. A bridge between war and peace. Many believe that if Collins had lived, the Civil War might have ended quickly. That he could have united the nation. Instead, his death deepened the divide. Ireland didn't just lose a leader, it lost its direction. And the bitter truth? He didn't fall in battle with the British. He died by the hands of his own countrymen. A hero, killed by the very freedom he helped create. With MichaelCollins gone and the nation in mourning, the tide of the war began to shift. By early 1923, the anti-treaty forces were falling apart. They were scattered, poorly armed, and exhausted. Their leaders were either dead, jailed, or in hiding. Public support had turned against them. People were tired of war, shops were ruined, railways blown up, entire towns were afraid to sleep at night. Then, in May 1923, a message was sent out quietly: ceasefire. Lay down your arms. The fighting stopped, but the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was grief. Nearly 2,000 lives lost. Most were Irish. Some were teenagers. Some were brothers. There were no peace talks, no forgiveness, no national apology, just a quiet decision to move on and never speak of it again. The government passed amnesty laws. Records were sealed, memories were buried. In homes across Ireland, people avoided the topic. Children weren't told what side their fathers fought on. Widows never said who had pulled the trigger. It was too painful, too close. And so, the war ended. But the wounds stayed open, hidden behind smiles and silence. Decades would pass before the country dared to even mention it in schools or museums, because the Irish Civil War didn't end with victory or defeat. It ended with heartbreak and generations of unspoken sorrow. But the Irish Civil War didn't just shape history, it shaped politics for an entire century. From its ashes, 2 major political parties were born. Fianna Fáil, created by Eamon de Valera and others who opposed the treaty, and Fine Gael, formed by supporters of the Free State and the pro-treaty side. For decades, these 2 parties dominated Irish elections. They weren't just political rivals, they carried the weight of Civil War memory. In villages and towns, people knew which party you belonged to and what side your grandfather had taken. It wasn't always said aloud, but it was always understood. Even as Ireland modernized, joining the EU, growing its economy, the divide remained. It wasn't until nearly a century later, in 2020, that something historic happened. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governed together. For the first time ever. It was more than politics, it was symbolic. It meant Ireland was finally beginning to face its past, not with blame, but with unity. Still, the legacy of pain lives on. Some families still don't speak of it. Old letters are hidden in drawers. Statues of Collins and de Valera still stand on opposite sides of history. The war is over, but the echo of brother fighting brother still whispers through the land. Why does this war, fought over a century ago, still matter today? Because it tells us something painful but powerful about freedom. Ireland had waited 700 years to break free from British rule. When it finally happened, the people expected peace, joy, a new beginning. But freedom didn't come in one piece. It came with strings, with compromises, with choices no one wanted to make. Some leaders said, "Take the deal. It's not perfect, but it's a start." Others said, "No deal with the crown. Not now, not ever." Both sides believed they were right. Both sides loved Ireland, but neither side could let go of their vision. That's when freedom turned into civil war. The Irish Civil War teaches us that sometimes the most painful battles aren't against foreign invaders, but against those we once fought beside. Not every enemy wears a different uniform. Sometimes the enemy is a brother who sees the world differently. That's why it matters. Because it wasn't just a war of guns, it was a war of ideals. And when people refuse to listen to each other, even the bravest nations can break from the inside. Ireland's tragedy is a warning to the world. Without unity, even victory can feel like defeat. Now let's take a moment, not to look at the war, but to look around the world. The Irish Civil War isn't just Irish history. It's a human pattern, a mirror reflecting what happens when nations tear themselves apart. Think of the American Civil War, brothers fighting over slavery and freedom, or Spain, where neighbors turned on each other over politics, or more recently, Rwanda, Syria, Ukraine, countries breaking from within. The causes are different, but the heartbreak is the same. The lesson? Freedom alone is not enough. You also need compassion. You need leadership that chooses healing over ego, that sees unity not as weakness, but as strength. When ideology becomes more important than people, everyone suffers. When leaders dig trenches instead of building bridges, children grow up with silence instead of stories. The Irish Civil War shows us how fragile peace really is. It reminds us that violence doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it starts in our homes, our churches, our politics, when we stop listening. So whether we're talking about Ireland, America, Africa, or Europe, this lesson is the same. We must protect our freedom not just with weapons, but with wisdom. Not just with power, but with humility. Because history doesn't just repeat. It warns, if we listen. And if we listen closely, we can still hear the echoes of that pain in the quiet corners of Irish life. Walk through an Irish village today. Look at the faces in the old black and white photos. Some of those smiles hide wounds that never healed. Even now, 100 years later, there are stories people still don't tell. Some grandfathers refused to speak of the war at all. Not because they forgot, but because they couldn't bear to remember. Some burned letters, others left photos untouched, tucked away in boxes no one dared open. In many families, one brother fought for the Free State, the other for the Republic. And for years afterward, their children avoided each other. There are graves with no names. Because to mark them might stir up old hatred. There are still roads in Ireland where people say quietly, "That's where he was shot, by his own." The war didn't end with peace treaties or flags, it ended with silence. And that silence became its own kind of pain. Generations grew up sensing there was something missing. Something dark, unspoken. History books skipped it, schools barely touched it. It was easier that way. But time doesn't erase wounds, it only buries them. And now, at last, Ireland is beginning to talk, to tell the stories, to name the graves, because even the truth that hurts is better than a silence that lasts forever. After the bloodshed, after the heartbreak, Ireland didn't collapse, it limped forward. Wounded, yes, but not broken. By 1949, Ireland had officially become a republic, no longer tied to the British crown. It joined the European Union. Its cities grew, its economy modernized. It embraced peace, democracy, and progress. But beneath the success, the Civil War left shadows. It shaped how people voted. It shaped which parties ruled. It shaped how history was taught or avoided. For many families, the Civil War wasn't just in the past. It was in the walls, in the family dinners, in the quiet way some names weren't spoken. Some children grew up never knowing which side their grandfather had fought for. Some did know, but never said. And so, even as Ireland moved forward, it did so with a quiet weight. It wasn't until the 21st century, almost 100 years later, that real healing began. When Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, the two rival parties born from the war, joined together to govern, That was more than politics. It was a message. We remember, but we move forward. We disagree, but we don't destroy each other. Ireland rebuilt not just its cities, but its soul, slowly, painfully. But it did. So what's the point of remembering all this? Why dig up the pain, the betrayal, the silence? Because memory is how we heal, and truth is how we move forward. The Irish Civil War is not just a sad story from the past, it's a warning to the present. It shows how quickly freedom can turn into fighting, how easily loyalty can become hatred, how even good people with good intentions can fall into war. Ireland won its freedom and then tore itself apart. But maybe that's what makes the story so powerful. Because in a world still filled with division, between left and right, between races, religions, and ideologies, Ireland's story reminds us, you don't need an outside enemy to destroy a country. You just need enough bitterness, enough pride, enough fear of compromise. But there's also hope. Because even after civil war, healing is possible. It takes time, honesty, forgiveness, and it begins by telling the truth. So wherever you live, whatever country, whatever politics, ask yourself, are we building bridges or digging trenches? Are we remembering history or repeating it? Because in the end, the only way to protect freedom is to protect each other, even when we disagree. In conclusion, the Irish Civil War wasn't just a chapter in history. It was a wound that shaped a nation's soul. It reminds us that freedom doesn't always arrive with unity, that peace is not the end of struggle, but often the beginning of deeper questions. Ireland's greatest challenge wasn't defeating an empire, it was learning how to live with itself. And in that challenge, it showed the world something raw, something human, that even in victory, a nation can break. That even among brothers, war can bloom. But also, that healing is possible. So if this story moved you, don't let it disappear into silence. Like, share, subscribe. Not just for views, but to keep memory alive. To remind the world that history doesn't just live in books, it lives in us. Because the past only stays buried if we let it. And some stories deserve to be told. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.